Okay, so for week 16, our code discussion, here's what I want you to do. And I set this up in the code along, so it shouldn't be a surprise. But looking at the carbon footprint, second part of water consumption is if you have a dishwasher and a washing machine, then perform the calculation twice. Okay? And the other one is if you have a dishwasher, do nothing. Now I ended up setting that input if they selected it to 0, and I showed you my functionality, but I'm actually going to talk about it in detail and kind of walk you through verbally, not with the code, but verbally how I accomplished it. Okay? So and I have my code right now paused on submission. Okay, so on the form submission. And there's a couple things I want to show you. This is a checkbox, right? So if you wanted to do input checkbox, MDM has a good reference here for input type checkboxed, and then you can set an attribute checked if you want it checked by default. And in my case, I wanted it checked by default, but then if the user selected that and they didn't have both, then I wanted to store that in the object that was created from the class. And I also wanted to adjust the calculation. So when that's checked, that's what the code does. Okay, so a couple things, and I just want to show you here because I paused at the point that it has actually created the new object from the class. So I want to show you in this case, I think it's FB object is what I called mine. Isn't it FB? OB? Oh, let me clear this so you can see it a little better and bring this up so you can see it. Okay, there we go. Okay, so if I hit tab, here's the object. Okay. Remember, these things are listed in this case alphabetically. This is not the way I pass the data to it, and that's okay. But here's the new arguments I sent that became values inside of the class when I created the instantiated object. So I ended up creating a dish and washer, and I set that to true or false. Now I'll show you how I did that with the checkbox in a minute. And then on the water, I ended up doing two things. I saved it as the points, and the points was based on if the user had selected this and whatever the score was based on their inputs. Okay, so I ended up having two new values for water. One is a string, and I called it val just to show that. Now the reason I did this was so that when the user hits edit, I knew how to make the form reflect what they had selected. Okay, and that's where we start to see maybe some of the downsides of using the values in the, let me just say this right, these values. It's like you lose some data, and the question would be, if you care about that, then you wouldn't do it this way. But for simplicity, I thought it was fun to do it this way. And again, thanks to Stephen for pointing this out. But here on the value, I kept it as whatever their selection was, and I kept it in string format. That way I didn't have to do the toString on the render edit event listener. Okay, so that should give you a good input for the changes that I did. Now the other thing I did, and let me just show you this. Now that we're in the form submission, I can grab e.target.dish washer, okay, dot checked. And what you can see here is if right now it is in the checked, and if I reference that value, I get back true. Okay, so if I clicked off, right, and now right now I'm in the middle of the debugger, so if I let it run, I won't be able to play in the console, so I don't want to do that. More than anything, I just want to show you that's how I reference that checkbox in order to figure out if it's true or if it's false. Okay, and then as I mentioned in the attendance, I used the ternary operator. It's actually ternary. I found that out last night. Now, I used just, and this is a simplified way to write an if-else. So I basically, and you don't have to return it because in this case I wrote it on the input as the parameter, okay, as the argument I was passing to the class. So I did this, wrote this, and again, not this exact one, but this ternary concept of a simplified if-else. And the nice thing is I could just put it right on the parameter, and then it'll calculate based on my condition and then send that value to the class. Okay, so I could ask if it's checked, right? If it's checked, then I'm going to take whatever that value, okay, whatever that was they selected, right? And now I do need to parse it, by the way, at that point, okay? And then I would then take that, and that would be what I send to the class. Else if it wasn't true, right, if it wasn't checked, then, so by the way, I would take that value and multiply it by 2 here, and that's because in here, right, it said if you have just perform the calculation twice. So I just doubled it. And maybe that's wrong, maybe it's a wrong interpretation of what it's saying, but that's the way I did it. Okay? Cool. So that's just a general, how I approached it, and it should give you really good hints for how you want to, if you want to use my solution. Now the last thing I'll show you is here, is that I wrote an event listener on this input. Okay, so I listened for change, and in this case I then said if on the change, right, the value was 0, and you're going to see this, right? So if the value, in this case it's a selection of don't have one, then I disabled this. Okay, and this worked fine. If I hit submit, this is actually on a new form submission, so, but in this case it worked fine. I'm going to go ahead and hit edit. Okay, there we go. So the only thing I ran into here was this acted a little funny. So what I ended up doing was making this as default, and you can see this here. As default, it was checked. And on form submission, I ended up setting this back to the default no matter what the user had selected. It's still got a bit of an edge case, and edge case means it doesn't work 100% of the time, but it generally works. Okay, so if I again hit edit here, I bring this back. Actually, it's not working right now. I must look at the code. So maybe that's something I'll do on the solution, to show you, basically get that working exactly. Or maybe one of you will get that as well. So that's my approach, okay? Again, I think that should give you some good direction. And then on the second part, so you do that part 1, and then you determine, you go then and write the 5. Now 5 should be pretty straightforward. Again, I would use these values, right? So just as a reminder, here like this, in the form, just makes it a little easier. Okay, if you put, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 drop downs here. Okay, so that one should be pretty straightforward, I think, based on what we did in the code along. Then commit that. And then submit your URL and give us something about your experience of doing this work, right? So again, if you needed, right? If you found it too hard, a bit hard, then you have an option. And even if you got some of it, right? You can always, and I really appreciate it when students really give the attempt a good solid try, because honestly, that's where you learn. I've said it before, so I'm repeating myself, but in that case, it's like you got most of it to work, because when I record the solution, I will have hopefully banged out that disable thing, because like I said, it works about 80% of the time. Anyway, but in order to have this option to get the most points, right, you do have to tell us, first on your first original post, and then you come back and update your post, adding, after you watch the solution, right, what you learn from it, because that's really what the goal is. Okay, anyway, I hope this helps, and I'll talk to you soon.